Brellas. This was the second class added to Splatoon 2, and it was a great concept. The idea of a shotgun-type shot with a shield attached to it is amazing, and we've never seen something quite like it in Splatoon. On top of that, after some buffs in one of the earliest patches, 1.4, both the regular and Brella would become staple, top, and high-tier weapons throughout their lifespan. These are all great things, but despite that, Brellas are really rare and uncommon. Why is that? Today, I'm going to be talking about why there's so few Brella players, and what happened to such a hyped-up class. If you enjoy my content, you can be sure to subscribe for more videos in the future, and let's get into it. Before I go too far into this video, I want to state that this was mostly about the regular Brella and Brella. Undercover isn't going to be talked about much because it's a little bit different, and you'll see more of what I mean when I explain it. For weapons that have been top tier throughout most of Splatoon 2's lifespan, feel incredibly unique being a brand new weapon class, have a ton of potential with their shielding capabilities, it just doesn't make sense that there's so low usage of it. And beyond solo queue, competitive is surprisingly even worse. Where you'd figure the tiers matter more, Brellas get continuously less common the higher up you go, which doesn't make any sense. And this is because, despite all the things that Brellas have going for them, which is quite a lot, there's two main things that really keep the weapon player base down. The first one is that it's really difficult to use. Now, Brella of course requires a good amount of aim. Because the shots are a shotgun type blast, hitting closer to the center will do much more reliable damage. Additionally, spacing, or your distance towards your opponent, is also really important, since you have to close the gap to get better damage. You have an entirely new aspect you have to manage, being your shield HP, something no other weapon really has to deal with. Being able to keep it up as long as possible and put yourselves in the right situations to stall opponents can be really difficult. And on top of that, the weapon has pretty poor ink efficiency. The normal Brella is often considered the hardest weapon in the entire game. While it doesn't have to deal with the insane aim that Charger does, because it's a slower, ink-hungry weapon that has a lot to deal with in terms of spacing and ink management, there's always a lot of things you have to deal with. Brella is also pretty ink-hungry, and has to deal with where it launches shield, which can get focused down more easily. This makes these weapons really difficult to play, which isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, for weapons with high HP shields, they should be pretty difficult to use. And while this does cut the weapon's usage rate, usually the higher up you go in rank, the more often you'll see these weapons. Chargers are a great example of this. The higher up you go, you'll start to see more better chargers, because the difficulty of the weapon is easier to get around the better of a player you are, and having potential to be one of the best weapons in the game with that skill isn't a problem for higher ranked players. However, we should be seeing this trend with Brella if this was the only factor, but we don't. Brella gets less common at higher level play, not the other way around, so there has to be another factor contributing to this. The other reason for Brella not being super popular is that the weapon just flat out doesn't always work. The Brella shield is really inconsistent when your opponent is laggy or has a big distance between them, you know, in the real world. And this is because of Nintendo's rather insufficient servers, or rather lack thereof. In this case, the Brella shield is often not up on the opponent's screen, which can result in you dying straight through it, or for sub-weapons to paint and explode under you without dealing damage and being invisible, and therefore almost impossible to actually react to. Because of these situations, it can make the Brellas really inconsistent, and you might be saying, okay, maybe just hold the shield more. Regular Brella is entirely dependent on flaring shield, meaning dropping and pulling it back up, because whenever the shield is dropped, it's regenerating its HP at a rate of 2.5 HP per frame. This is my own statistics, and you can see I bring up the Brella shield about 15 times every minute. That's a lot of situations where you can be shot right through it as it comes up a few frames later on your opponent's screen. While Brella has this problem to a lesser degree, it can still be treated as you not being in front or behind your Brella shield on your opponent's side when they throw a bomb at it or shoot you right through it. Additionally, Brella has a weird thing where suction bombs that hit the top of the shield just kill you behind it. Amazing. And, though rare, the 10th shield also can just flat out go through the stage sometimes. So, inconsistency is a big problem, but you might be surprised to hear that this doesn't hurt other weapons as much. A big example would be Tri-Slosher, which prior to a very recent patch, had dead zones in between its hitboxes, where it would look like it would hit the opponent, but actually didn't. However, Tri-Slosher still had a good level of play, and it was still a solid weapon throughout its time. So why does Tri see a good amount of play, and Brella doesn't? Well, it's because Try isn't as difficult to use. Now, that's not a bad thing either. I'm not trying to knock Try players for this. But what it allows you to do is play Try alongside other weapons. So situations where you don't want to play Try Slosher, you can play other Sloshers. Most Slosher players play Slosher, Try, and Machine for this very reason, and still it gives a lot of versatility. However, Brella just doesn't have this luxury. Brella being a difficult weapon means you have to put a lot of time into it in order to make it worth it. And now, you can probably see the big problem with Brella usage. It is exactly the combination of inconsistency and difficult to use that kills the weapon usage rate. Think about it. If you really want to dedicate your time to learning and mastering a weapon, you'd at least want it to work all the way, right? And if you're going to play an inconsistent weapon, you might as well be able to switch off it easily to play something more consistent. That's the problem. It's the combination of both these factors that make Brellas so rare, because it's just flat out not worth putting up with the inconsistencies to play the weapon. You have to have a secondary with Brella, and having two weapons at the same time is a lot more difficult with how hard Brella is. This just makes it never really worth it to pick up. For those players who want to play a higher difficulty weapon, there's just more consistent options, and nobody's really going to look for an inconsistent weapon in the first place, so don't really got anything for it there. Japan is proof of this, as they have vastly more Brella players because they mostly play with people inside their own region, which is a tiny island, versus the Western scene, where you play with people across multiple continents. So a few of you may be asking why I play Brella given all this, and to make a long story short, I used to play Range Blaster, which translated well into Brella. When I picked up the weapon, including playing a top-level tournament the literal hour it released, I ended up doing very well with it, and it became one of my best weapons, and the latency issues weren't apparent earlier. Currently, there is two major leagues for Splatoon, the Transatlantic Splatoon League and Leagues Under the Ink, alongside NA Championships. But the thing that all of these leagues have in common is their group stage and all of NA Championships are separated by region, meaning Brella is a lot more consistent since I'm not playing people in Europe. So it overall works out for me playing it in some situations. And the few times where I'm playing against European teams or outside of my region, I can play Rapid, since again, my experience of 2 years of Range Blaster in the first game transferred over well, and Rapid works very well against the European teams in the league. At the end of the day, I play this weapon because of some very specific circumstances to me, and it's not like I would recommend anyone picking up the weapon who's going into competitive. If you enjoy it, play it. I'm happy to see more Brellas out there, but just be aware that the weapon has this to deal with, and you're going to have to figure out something in terms of how you want to deal with that. But my hope for Splatoon 3 is that Nintendo gets, actual servers and a higher tick rate. And there may be hope for that. The recently announced Super Mario Party Online update actually has better online compared to previous games. And while, of course, we don't know how well this will transfer into Splatoon 3 or other future games, there's a chance Nintendo can have better servers, which would reduce the effects of latency and poor internet connections. So that's my hope. But for the time being, this is why there aren't many Brella players. It's better worth it to focus on other weapons rather than play something that's both hard to use and inconsistent. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.